guys, it's Sam, and this is my last wrap-up of 2024. I know we are now in 2025 when you're watching this. I am also in 2025 when I'm filming this, but with all the holiday stuff, I haven't had exactly a ton of time to film. Or rather, I haven't been prioritizing filming because I have a bunch of other hobbies and social life and holidays and whatever. So before I get into all of the New Year's content and wrapping up the 2024 content, this is the final reading wrap-up of 2024 before I do all of my favorites of the year, least favorites of the year, how my reading goals went, blah, 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 all that, which is my favorite. I'm so excited for it. I also got new lights for Christmas, and I'm not quite used to them, / I don't know if I have them configured correctly. So if the lighting is wonky or washed out or whatever, please tell me, but I will be figuring that out in the future. But I have 5 books to wrap up the end of 2024. Let's get into it. First is the book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. I actually listened to this on audio, and I'm undecided if that was a good call or not. I think it was. I really liked the audio. I could see myself continuing with the audio, but I also feel like reading it would be, like in physical copy, would be a different experience as well. I don't know. This is the first book in an adult fantasy trilogy and is following 2 characters who are existing in this library. One of them has always lived in the library, and one of them had their town attacked by this like enemy entity, race. It's kind of unclear at the beginning what exactly they are, and so she is taken in by the library, like has to go to the city, and eventually ends up becoming a part of this library as well and like being trained in it. And this library is like a magical library, right? It's a fantasy library, but it's like more than any other library I feel like I've almost ever read about. Consider like the Library of Alexandria, but like in a fantasy world with sort of interdimensional properties. Like it's one of those libraries that you see in fantasy books that like has its own personality kind of. There's all of these things that exist in the library that make it almost its own entity. There are things that protect the library. The library only lets you see what it wants you to see. There are ways to travel within the library. The stacks are constantly changing. Like it's that kind of environment, which is my favorite type of fantasy library. So this is following these 2 characters whose paths eventually intersect. So what's cool about this is there's some political machination stuff that's happening as far as this world and like how we view, let's say, like an enemy, how things change over time. Like there's a big theme discussion around that. Because this is a book about books and about a library, there's a lot of like linguistical stuff too, about like how we talk about things, how we talk about people, things like that. Learning, who gets to learn, who is in control of what we learn, all that kind of stuff. Another additional tidbit that was just like cute is that there are like chapter headers, right, that are excerpts of different books, and some of them I think are not real books, that, you know, books made up for this world, and some of them are actual books. Like Mark Lawrence has some of his other books like quoted in here. Other fantasy authors that I was familiar with, again, maybe all of them are real books, I just didn't look up every single one because again I was listening on audio, but that was a cute little tidbit about like all of these books exist in this library, right? Like fantasy, not real books, and books that exist in our world and everything. So anyway, this was really cool. This was a good start to a series, and I really like Mark Lawrence's stuff. I've enjoyed his books since like the Red Sister series, and also that's referenced in here like a little bit. Anyway, it's not interconnected, but like the books thing, right? So I really enjoy like what he does with all this, and this was an interesting start, especially if you like sort of time, parallel universe-y type stuff also is like part of this too, because of this library being like a place outside of time. I don't know. Very cool, very interesting start to a series, so I'll be continuing with this, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then I listened to On Tyranny by Timothy D. Snyder. This was originally a shorter political pamphlet that came out just about like tyranny and fighting tyranny. Timothy Snyder is a historian and has been like studying tyranny and fascism and things, and so like, you know, relevant information. So it kind of goes along like, hey, with rises in fascism around the world and things, what do you do? How do you respond? What do we know from history? So the first part of this book is like pretty short, and then he has done an updated part of it as of 2022, specifically around Ukraine and the history of Ukraine and the history of Russia. And it's like 20 additional kind of like lessons that we've learned from Ukraine specifically. He also like, I think specifically does study Ukraine, like has a lot of friends in Ukraine, things like that. So this is like updated with, you know, new information. And it was interesting because I actually don't know a ton about all of the Ukrainian politics stuff and the Russian political, like all of it, and it's a lot and it's very complicated. But one thing I did learn from this is how like Russia has always been in conflict as a country, like since the beginning of time, basically. Since the beginning of Russia has been in conflict. And so it's very interesting. Like Russian history is incredibly interesting, and how Russia and like Putin specifically views Ukraine and all of this stuff. So that whole conflict and how that ties into fascism is a big part of this like updated version. But I think even that first part of it, I sort of want to pick up there's a copy of the shorter political pamphlet part of just like how to fight fascism, because that's been top of mind for me in a lot of ways. So yeah, just the rise of fascism around the world and the ways that these things ebb and flow. And it's just important to know what we've learned before from history, because history does repeat itself. Anyway, I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I also listened to Seven Surrenders by Ada Palmer. This is the second book in the Terra Ignota series, which is a quartet, I believe it's 4 books, science fiction series. It's set in a utopian future in which people are no longer parts of countries. They are like parts of hives, which is essentially like sort of they choose what country of values they belong to, and then within that they also have bashes instead of families, which is again sort of like chosen families. And so we're existing in this utopian future where they've kind of figured out how to make crime no longer happen. Not that it never happens, but it's very, very rare. Accidents and like death and some of that is very rare, and it has become a more like, I'm trying to think of a word. They have tried to remove differences in a lot of ways, in various ways, in a way that again creates utopia. But there's like they don't really acknowledge gender anymore at all. They have people almost as computers in some ways to like solve again different anomalies and stuff, so like bad things don't happen, whatever. So this is the second book in the series, so I can't go into a ton of detail, but what I will say is that this series is a thematic discussion of humanity. The series is so weird, but I also encourage so many people to read it if it all intrigues you. It's not going to be a favorite for everyone, but essentially the second book in particular is like all just conversations between people. Like it's not like it's not like a lot of action-y things are happening, but the way that we cover just the narrator and the unreliable narrator of the story, because someone is writing down a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of discussions of religion and gods and things, because they've also eliminated religion. Like you can't really be religious, but then they have this entity of people who will talk to you about religion, but you aren't allowed to organize around religion. So that's fascinating. Again, gender is no longer a thing, but there are people who try to like buck against that, and discussions of gender and like people in power. And it's just, I can't even go into all of it. You guys, I can't even go into all of it. It's impossible to explain the series, but it's so interesting if you enjoy heavily thematic discussions in sci-fi in particular. So in the first book, we sort of figure out that there is a little bit more of like I would say like a science fantasy element to a piece of this. And then you kind of lay out all the major players and a lot of this like political machination stuff that's happening, and how the world views things, and how potentially this period of utopia may be falling apart for various reasons. So yeah, this is a series where there's like kind of no good guys and bad guys. There's some people that you feel like are bad guys, but then you're like, it's a mind fuck of a series. But anyway, the second book is really good. I gave it like 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, from an enjoyment standpoint, it's so hard to even rate these, because like right now my brain is kind of like going offline because there's so much that I'm thinking about this series. So like from a craft standpoint and from an undertaking standpoint, these books are like 5 out of 5 stars. Sometimes it's a little bit like what, because it is just like all conversations. Anyway, so I quite enjoyed this still. I will be continuing to read these. These are fascinating little books. They're not super long. And yeah, I enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. I finished the Live Ship Trader series this year. Yay to me. I will be talking about all the goal stuff and finishing series stuff in a later video, but this is one of my big goals for the year. And this is the final book in the Live Ship Trader series, which is the second series in the overall Realm of the Elderling series that Robin Hobb has written, in which there's like 16 books, all taking place in the same world, but each sort of trilogy, well, there's mostly trilogies in one quartet, follow different like parts of the world and different parts of time and whatever. So this is following the Live Ship Traders area of the world, which is a like coastal region, and one area of this world basically have these live ships, which if they're made from a certain kind of wood, and after 3 captains die on board, they become awakened, and they become like a entity, kind of like a live ship. And those ships are like very powerful, able to navigate waters better, able to do certain kinds of trade, whatever. And in the first book, we witness like this Vestrit family. It's the family that we mainly follow. Their live ship is awakening because their captain and a lot of the main characters, either husband, father, whatever, is passing away. And so that kicks off a bunch of shit. And everything goes from there. So I can't really talk in depth about obviously what happens in the final book, but thankfully this final book wrapped up a lot of stuff, which I knew it was going to. It's a finale. But what I will say, and I've talked about this in depth about Robin Hobb's books in general, and most people have, is that Robin Hobb's books are wonderfully written and full of suffering. Like, the characters do not succeed. If you're used to reading fantasy books and books in general and being like, okay, the characters are going to go through a hard time, but mostly they're going to get out okay, that's like kind of not true in these books. And they're an incredible character study. Every character is not 100% good or bad. This book in particular, like all of these books, this whole series in particular, has like such depth of characters to where you're like, you love and hate the same characters. Like, it's so interesting. And yeah, they're hard to read. So especially the second book. I mean, the first book and the second book were just like rough to get through at times. This final book was finally having some things go right because you have to wrap up a series, right? But it's still like very heavy, very intense. There's a lot in these books. There's child abuse. There's lots of death. There's rape. There is like torture and stuff. There's slavery discussions. There's a lot. There's like colonization and things, a lot of misogyny, like heavy topics, but I wouldn't call this like a grimdark series or anything, even though you would hear that list and you'd be like, oh my god, it's like handled very well, and there's a sense of hope throughout, even when there's a lot of shit happening. So I love the way this is wrapped up. This is one of my favorite finales I've ever read. I went and immediately looked up like a bunch of fan art and stuff after. And I had always started Robin Hobb to get to the series, so happy that I finally finished it. But yeah, I will probably be taking a break from Robin Hobb for like the next year, just to be like, because she makes her characters suffer so much, and they can be incredibly hard to read. So I will be taking a break before Tawny Man, probably. But yeah, I'm very happy to be finished with this, and I will be doing a full review talking about all my thoughts about this, and probably also a gush, so that you get all the spoilery stuff, because there's a lot of spoilery stuff to discuss. But 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. And finally, we have The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. This is one I also listened to, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. Also, if you've noticed that I've almost listened to like all of these books that I read in December, I've really gotten into coloring lately, adult coloring. And so I've been doing a lot of audiobook listening in addition to doing the adult coloring, because I've gotten off social media a lot. And so I've replaced it with coloring and listening to audiobooks. So if you want to see the coloring that I do, I'm not at all like an expert or anything, but if you enjoy coloring, I was originally going to talk about on this channel, and I will in some videos here and there, like coloring plans and whatever, but I mostly have an Instagram that I will be posting my coloring. I will link that down below if you're interested. But The Justice of Kings is narrated by a clerk of the justice of the emperor. So a justice is someone, this is a first book in a fantasy, adult fantasy series, and they are people that kind of travel around the country and stuff and execute the emperor's justice. So they listen to like crimes and they investigate things, and they're sort of judge, jury, and executioner on a lot of stuff. And they are incredibly powerful. They are like incredibly smart and well trained in a bunch of different things. And they also have some magical elements. This is almost like a low magic series where like magic is real, but only certain people have access to it. So we are following this person's clerk who like is writing down all of the history of like what he's doing and what he's gotten into and whatever. And this is kicking off some bigger political stuff happening in this world. So I really enjoyed this. This is like pretty much right up my alley. I sort of have the feeling, even though it's not Monster Honey, but some of the dynamics and stuff are similar to like a Witcher. This is like if Geralt was actually more politically involved, not begrudgingly because he is, but like if he was like actually politically involved and like trained by a group that is a part of the like political system, that would kind of be like this dynamic of like a Geralt and a Ciri, even though this man did not completely raise the clerk, but they have that kind of same paternal dynamic, and getting into some shit, right? So like, I think if you like that, you might like this, even though they're not necessarily completely similar in tone, but very dark world, a lot of political machination stuff, someone sort of begrudgingly getting involved with some of these things, a little bit of a gruff exterior, and everything kind of taking off. This first book even was like pretty intense. They're investigating murders, they're investigating like torture and abuse and a bunch of different stuff. And again, a lot of political machinations, but I really enjoyed this. I think I'm gonna land at like a 4.5 to 5 stars. We'll see how this like sits. It's like the last book that I read this year. We'll see what this is, but already a favorite. I have the rest of the series already on my shelf, so I'm gonna keep reading these. Yeah, this has been very highly talked about by a lot of people, and I can totally see why. So yeah, those are the final books that I read in 2024. Overall in 2024, I had a really good reading year. I will talk about that in depth more in my wrap-up videos, but if you have seen most of my wrap-ups throughout the year, you probably have picked up on the fact that, like, haven't read a lot of bad stuff, DNF'd anything that I wasn't super interested in, and overall had, like, a pretty solid year. So look forward to some of that New Year's content. Comment below and let me know how your end of the reading year went. And also, if you've made it this far, you're probably invested in my content enough to let me know if you want to see certain types of New Year's content first. Like, do you care about the goals stuff more? Do you care about the favorite stuff more? Do you care about the wrapping up of the goals and the new goals? Like, what kind of videos for the New Year's content, wrapping up the year content, do you want me to prioritize? Because I'm filming all of them. I just don't know what order necessarily to upload them in. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.